I will try to visualize and explain a little bit, or at least try to give you a very simple explanation of what a branch is and how we might think about branches. So usually you have a project, you have a folder, and you have some files. And then what Git does is it takes this project folder, let's name this resources app. You have, and it says, instead of having you work on a folder like this, where you can change things and then you cannot go back after a while, if you have made some changes, you cannot really revert back or keep a history of past changes. So Git takes this folder and it kind of like turns this into like a super folder. So it makes this into a Git repository. When you run the command git init, Git kind of like wraps this folder into this, let's say, super layer. And from now on, it can track any changes that you want Git to track on this folder. So instead of just changing things and then having these changes just replace and destroy all parts, you keep a memory, you keep in memory, inside Git's memory, the things that were done in the past. So you run git init, and then you want to make some changes. So you go into like deleting style CSS, and then maybe renaming app.js to, I don't know, resources.js, and another file called data.json. So you make some changes, and instead of just making all these changes and then losing all the previous stuff that you went through, it says for every single change, you can make what we call a commit, which is basically just a snapshot of your folder. So we start with a snapshot, like an initial commit. So we take a snapshot of how the folder looked like in the beginning. Then as we change things, we make commits. So we take snapshots and we keep everything in like a kind of like a linear timeline. So when we are at some stage at the commit, let's say commit 3, and our project and our folder looks like this, we can always go back and check how things were in the previous commit, in the previous snapshot. Okay, we had this app.js and it contained some code. We had the index.html, but no JSON or no CSS. And then we can go back and we can see. So this is what Git does. It takes these snapshots of our project folder, and then we add the message, we make these commits, and we can go back. And the process from going from one, let's say, snapshot to the other, you probably already know this, are these two commands. So instead of saying git take snapshot, would be a nice command, we have to run git add with a specific file or files or folders, and then git commit to actually take each of these steps. And then we make some changes, resources, I don't know, let's say version 2, and another commit. So when you run these commands, this might not seem like a lot when you just type git add, git commit, and then you will run the git log command from time to time to see like this history of changes. So this is kind of like, this is the git history, and then you run git log, and it will show you all these previous commits, all these commits, and you can see all this timeline, okay? But this is what's happening under the hood. This is the concept behind Git. Its snapshot is a particular, let's say, view of your folder at some particular point in time. And when you're working on a project, what you usually want to see is the latest changes, the latest snapshot, okay? So how can Git know which of these snapshots you're currently working on and you currently, want to see and have in your folder? So this is where the branches come into play. It says, when you're working on a project and you start making like changes, I will give you a name, just a label. You can give it anything you like, but usually we start with the branch main. And it says, I will name this commit branch main. Just give it a label. Or if you're working on a particular app, you can name the branch my app or whatever. Or if you're working on a feature, you can name the branch feature X or whatever. And then as you move on to different commits, the branch kind of like this label moves along. So whenever you are at, let's say, the latest commit, it provides and has this branch label, which is basically just a simple text, it's just a name main. And it connects all this series of commits with this branch name so that you know that this is kind of like a series of changes, a timeline of changes that are of particular interest to you because of a particular project or a particular feature. So the branch name is actually a way to describe this history. Okay, you started here, and then you made some changes in order to get closer to your target, to your final lap, and then here and here. And all this history is accompanied by a label. We call them branches. Now, if at some point, let's say at this point, you want to add a new feature. So let's say this is our WDX repo, okay, and we want to add a new, say, resources UI, or any other feature. We can keep moving on. You can make some changes, and then you can git add, and you can make these changes, resources, I don't know, 3, and maybe resources HTML, and maybe resources CSS, okay? So you just make some changes that are related to this new UI, and you can git add, you can commit, and you can just move this here. So you take a new snapshot, and you have your new feature. And this can go on. You can just make more commits, and this process isn't just one snapshot or one step. You make changes, you commit, you make changes, and then you finally arrive at the destination, which is the feature, the fully working feature. But up to this point, we had a fully working learning platform, let's say. So this new feature, these resources might not be a good idea to integrate, or either mess your code or start working on this. Maybe there will be bugs, maybe there will be conflicts, maybe your new code will be affecting the already running platform. So when we work on a new feature, we try to avoid this kind of just move forward, make changes and take a new snapshot and so forth. So this is where branches also become very helpful. So instead of going this route, what we do instead is we stay here, and we say, okay, this timeline reflects, let's say this is the branch main. This reflects also the current main, let's say, version, the working version of our application, which is running on the website, and we don't want to affect this, or we don't want to change it. We don't want to introduce any new features. We want to work safely in kind of a different environment, let's say. We don't want to change or affect any of this history. So what we do instead is we create a new branch. We say, okay, let's create a new branch, and we call it resources, just like we. So from this point onwards, because we want to take the latest changes, okay, so you can think of a new branch as kind of like making a copy of your, let's say, latest code, your latest commit. So we go in a different route. We don't want to, and we start working on a new branch. So we have a new label that accompanies this exact copy of our latest changes. So we think of it as you making a copy of your folder, and you give it a name, a branch name, and then you can start working. So instead of affecting this branch, this timeline, these commits, and this kind of serial timeline of history of working and developing stuff, you just make a copy, and you can start experimenting or developing your new feature in a different universe, you might say. So you do your add and commit, and then you go to commit 5, and then you make some more changes. And all this now is kind of it starts here, but now it follows a different path, and it's kind of isolated, and it's independently being developed from the original main branch. And you start working, and you make more commits. So git add, git commit, some more changes, you add some. This is basically what we do with Git, right? Git add, git commit, git add, git commit, and we create this commit, this snapshot. So this is all. And now we're on a branch, we call it resources UI, and it gives us the ability to think of it as a kind of a different isolated environment. We took a copy from the latest changes so that we start with a currently working production code. We don't want to start from scratch. And then we started working, and all this timeline is stored in Git through Git in kind of an isolated different container called a branch. But what it is basically a label that is connected and related, basically these two commits, these two new commits, because we have here the same commit, but the new commits based on the latest code are these two, and all these two together, along with the rest of the the tail of this chain, is what we call a branch resources UI. And now, if you, at some point, first of all, you can test the code, you can switch to this branch, and you can check the code, you can test the code, see whether you like it, or maybe fix it, make some more commits and so forth. But it doesn't affect this code, and it doesn't affect the code that is running, currently on the site and is working. So you're pretty safe. And in here, you can test it, you can, do whatever you want. And if you don't like it, you can just remove it altogether, just throw it to the garbage. But if you really like this feature and you want to make it part of the main branch, or you want to put it in production, you want to merge these changes into this branch. So when we merge a branch, it means we take the changes that we made while we were on this new other feature branch, and in some way we have to put it in here so that the main branch, the main timeline, gets updated with the changes that we're now know for sure fully tested and are reliable and can become part of the production. So this is when we need to merge into the main branch, which means that there are several ways that we can do this. All we need to do is to take these two snapshots, because we want to keep the history, even though the feature is this code. This is the latest commit. This is the code that is right now in my folder, and this is what we might see on the browser when we run it. But we want to keep track maybe of the previous changes, or maybe we just want to take the latest changes. Anyway, we can do both. But usually what we do is we take these changes and we integrate them onto the main branch, usually with a new commit that joins this guy here with these guys here. So we take the changes or the differences, basically, because this code has changed. So Git does some magic over there, runs some algorithm, and it combines the changes and the differences between the two. And if we're lucky enough and it can merge them together, it creates a new commit, which we're going to name not commit 4, but let's say new feature, because we give names to our commits. And now all these changes become part of the main branch. You can see the label accompanies this timeline. Whenever we make a new commit, this branch move along. So we start from here, we go here. So every commit, this label moves so that Git has this concept of this chain, of this series of snapshots of commit. And now the feature branch is successfully integrated into the main branch. So this is kind of like what branches are on a high level. So it's really important to grasp this concept, because just talking about branches and running some commands usually don't make too much sense about what's happening and how we should think about these branches. But this is basically conceptual overview of the branches. Another thing you might want to do, a different way to merge, is to, instead of just creating a new commit and then merging these together, is maybe slightly different, but makes more sense. Since we started here from a copy of this one, we can take the full timeline of the new branch. Let me make another commit just to make this a little bit. So instead of focusing just on the latest changes, if I want to keep all this history, all this commit, just to know how I went from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 before I realized my feature, I can take all of these commits and I can do what it's called a git rebase. So it's kind of like a merge strategy. So a git rebase is a little bit different than the ordinary git merge. Basically, we take all this new updated chain and we copy it like here. So that's another way of merging changes from this branch into this. And that's we use it whenever we want the full history. So if we want all the steps to be in this branch, so we can just take a step back and see how we went from commit 2 to commit 3 to commit 4 to commit 5 and so forth, we do a git rebase. Otherwise, we say, okay, it doesn't matter how many steps you took and what steps you took to go from here to here to the feature. We just want, these two to be mashed together, to be combined, and you do a simple, let's say, git merge, and you commit something like commit merge, resource UI. So you just combine, let's say, this last commit, and you get a simpler, shorter, let's say, chain of commits. But this history will not be part of this timeline. Okay, so that's kind of like the drawback. But sometimes we prefer this one. We don't want this full series of steps to be kind of like, let's say, polluting the main chain, the main git log or git history. So you can do both with git merge or git rebase. So that's what branches are conceptually in Git. Let me know if you have any questions on this part, which is also pretty important, this branching concept.